Hi, Pudge.
Hi, Bandit.
Today's episode is one that differentiate us from the big dogs podcasters out there. Important to point, we did not get paid by Qatar, not even the Mossad. This is a big one. We're going into the deep end today. We aren't just talking about a prejudice. We're talking about a virus that has mutated for 2,000 years.
It's antisemitism, the longest hatred. But today, we're adding the final modern mutation, Zionism. We're going to see how the world's oldest scapegoat went from a people without a home to a people with a state, and why that changed everything and nothing at all.
Wait. Nothing at all? That's like saying a software update fixed the bugs but kept the pop-ups. Pretty optimistic for you, Pudge.
True. Usually, when things change this much, people find a brand new way to be offended. But let's look at our blueprint. We've got the foundation ready. Let's see how these ancient pillars are still shaking it.
It starts with the soul. In the early centuries, the church fathers needed to distinguish themselves from their Jewish roots. They applied a label that would act as a death warrant for centuries. Deicide. The killers of God.
Because apparently, the Roman Empire, the world's most efficient execution machine, was just a bystander in that one. Think about Sarah in our blueprint. If she lived in 11th century Europe, her priest isn't telling her about a complex historical Roman execution. He's telling her that the people down the street are monsters who rejected the light.
That's where the blood libel comes in. The lie that Jewish people use the blood of Christian children for Passover matzah. It sounds insane, but it was the fake news of the Middle Ages. No TikTok back then, just a good old-fashioned campfire lie that ended in a riot. It made violence against Jews feel like a holy act.
Right. Because nothing says holy act quite like believing a recipe for flatbread involves kidnapping. Logic wasn't exactly a priority in the 11th century. By the Middle Ages, the mutation moves from the soul to the wallet. Bandit, the Jewish banker trope, wasn't a choice. It was a legal cage.
The classic you can't sit with us strategy, but with higher stakes.
Exactly. Jews were barred from owning land. You couldn't join a guild to be a blacksmith or a farmer. Basically, if it involved getting your hands dirty or building something, the law said, no thanks. The only thing left was money lending, which the church called usury, and forbade for Christians.
So the nobility allowed them to do the one thing everyone else was too holy to do, and then got mad when the bill came due.
It was the perfect scam. The kings used the Jews as their private piggy banks. They'd let them collect taxes and provide loans. Then, when the debts got too high, the king would just incite a riot, kick the Jews out, and cancel the debt. It's the original delete your browser history move, but with more pitchforks.
Talk about a predatory loan. Only the borrower is the one with the army.
This brings us to 2026. Why is this hatred exploding now? It's the popularity trap.
Oh, here we go. We've gone from medieval kings to blue-check influencers with a ring light and a savior complex.
Exactly. Influencers realized that tapping into global cabal or Zionist puppet master tropes is a fast track to viral engagement. They don't care if the info is a forgery from 1903. They just care about the likes.
It's the backwind of hate. It's easier to blame a shadow than to explain why your own policies are failing. And the politicians are right there with them, tagging along for the ride like a kid chasing an ice cream truck.
Except the ice cream is made of ancient prejudices, and the truck is headed off a cliff. This brings us to the 1800s, the Age of Enlightenment. For the first time, Jews were being told they could finally be equal citizens. But then came the Dreyfus Affair in France.
A Jewish captain in the French army is framed for treason. Even in enlightened France, the crowd shouted, "Death to the Jews!" A journalist named Theodor Herzl watched this and realized it doesn't matter how much we assimilate, we will always be the other.
That was the birth of modern Zionism. The idea was simple. If the world won't let us be safe in their homes, we need a home of our own. It was a movement for self-determination.
But here's the mutation, Pudge. The moment the Jewish people decided to act like a nation, the old dual loyalty trope shifted. Now, they weren't just untrustworthy neighbors, they were agents of a foreign power. All right, let's pause for a second. Pudge, you've got the data center fired up. We need to clear some smoke on this term Zionism because right now it's being treated like a 4-letter word in some corners of the internet.
Exactly, Bandit. If we're doing a rendered deep dive, we have to look at the definitions, not just the emotions. Let's pull up the Zionism blueprint.
I see it on the table. First myth, Zionism is a modern colonial invention. What does the history say?
It says that's a failure of memory. Zionism didn't start in the 1800s. It's a 2,000-year-old movement for indigenous return. The Jewish people are one of the few groups in history that maintained a continuous presence, a language, and a cultural focus on their ancestral homeland for 2 millennia after being forcibly exiled.
So it's not colonialism in the sense of a European power grabbing new land. It's a displaced people returning to their origin point.
Correct. It's categorized as a national liberation movement.
Okay, second myth, you can't be a Zionist and also support a Palestinian state.
This is where the friction gets real for Jack and Sarah. In reality, Zionism is just the belief in the right of the Jewish people to self-determination in their homeland. It doesn't inherently preclude others from having that same right. In fact, many of the founders of Zionism and modern Israeli leaders have supported various partition plans for 2 states.
So Zionism is about the right to exist, not necessarily the right to everything.
Precisely. It's about sovereignty.
Last one, and this is the big one we see on social media. Zionism is racism?
That's a mutation of a 1975 UN resolution that was actually revoked in 1991. If you look at the rendered reality of the state Zionism built, Israel is the most diverse nation in the Middle East. You have Arab Supreme Court justices, Druze commanders, and a population where over half the Jewish citizens are actually of Middle Eastern and North African descent. People who were kicked out of other Arab countries.
So the virus tries to call it racism, to trigger the outsider pillar we talked about earlier.
It's a rebranding of the old dual loyalty trope. Tries to make a native people look like invaders so you can justify the hatred.
Thanks for the check, Pudge. Now that we've cleared the air, let's get back to how this hits the household.
This is the most complex part of the blueprint. After the Holocaust, the world said, never again. But within a few decades, the same ancient tropes found a new target. The State of Israel.
This is where it gets tricky for people. You can criticize a government, that's politics. But when you start using the old blood libel or world domination tropes and just swap the word Jew for Zionist, you aren't talking politics anymore. You're using the old virus.
Exactly. The blood libel became Zionists are targeting children. The global banker became Zionist control of the media. The nationalist outer became Zionists don't belong in the Middle East.
It's the same pillars, Pudge, just a different coat of paint. In our blueprint, Jack sees the news and gets confused because the language sounds like social justice, but the bones of the argument are 1,000 years old. We're looking at a hatred that is never really about what Jewish people do. It's about the society that needs a scapegoat.
When the economy fails, or the culture shifts too fast, people reach for the easiest answer. And for 2,000 years, that answer has been the same.
Zionism was meant to be the cure for that, the right to be a sovereign people. But the virus just mutated to attack the cure.
We've got to be smarter than the mutation. We've got to look at the blueprint and see the friction for what it really is.
Look, at the end of the day, we've seen that this isn't just a history lesson, it's a warning. We're dealing with a virus that's been optimized for 2,000 years, and right now, it's being fed into an algorithm by people who care more about their follower count than the truth. It's easy to get swept up in the back wind of a viral trend, but remember, once you start looking for a shadow to blame for your own problems, you stop looking for actual solutions. History shows us that antisemitism is never really about what Jewish people are doing. It's about the anxieties of a society that's lost its way. Don't let the clout chasers pick your villains for you. We've got the blueprints, we've got the studio, and we're going to keep finding the truth in the friction. See you next Sunday.